Deep listening. Deep listening. In this world of always immediate feedback, entertain yourself all day long. TV, radio, internet. Do we see it as a luxury to go into deep listening? We usually don't wait long enough. Imagine a song where the beat is just is that typically the rhythm of our songs? There's usually a little more, right? Some kind of rhythm. What's the difference? What's the difference between and the rhythms we may feel in life? What's the difference? Pacing, and pacing is tempo.
We pay attention. Concentration.
Say that part again.
Pay attention to something that's faster.
Oh, okay. Pay attention maybe to something that's faster. More exciting, more lively, right? Some kind of unique expression. And what makes the difference is the silence, the rests in between the notes. How about your thoughts, your words? Do we give enough space and rest between the notes in our lives? This book, Words Can Change Your Brain, by Andrew Newberg and Mark Waldman. Now, how many of you have been around science of mind, let's say, for more than 10 years, the philosophy we know here? Okay, lots of folks. For those of you that may not know the science of mind philosophy, this book would be a contemporary version of Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life, right? Except there is the science of it in the book. And of course, when Ernest Holmes was alive, the author of our Science of Mind textbook, there was not so much study and research, there was not so much known about the neurology, the neuroscience of our thinking, of both from the brain and how it works, but also our thinking. And Johnny Samples, for those of you who know her, she kept telling me about this book, and when I finally read it, I was like, ah, a very powerful book. The book ultimately speaks to a model that they call the compassionate communication model. And while I don't know nonviolent communication as well, I see similarities there as well as similarities in spiritual mind treatment. And in the compassionate communication model, they built the model based on what they know in science about the brain. Why speaking more slowly? Rest in between the words. Why thinking and allowing the deep silence in between our thoughts. Deep listening interrupts the inner chatter. So we say by changing your thinking, you can change your life. Literally out of the book, by changing the way you use language, the way you use the words you use, what words you choose consciously, changes your consciousness. How about that? Now we know this. Do we know this? And when I do this, I mean, do you know it by the experience of it? Not, yeah, I know that. Now, the components of compassionate communication, there are 12 of them, which seems like a lot. In instructional design, where I have a degree, they say never have more than 7 points, plus or minus 2. But the first thing that they talk about is, first of all, relaxing. And they literally mention that when we think about deep listening, if we're talking about speaking with others, the first thing to do is relax, and they actually say, force yourself to yawn. Force yourself to just move your neck around. The second step is to become present. The third step, cultivate inner silence. The fourth is increase positivity. And they talk about how, yes, positive thinking does change your brain. The next is reflect on your deepest values. And because you are each unique, your top 3 to 5 values are uniquely yours. But when you know what your deepest values are, it's your rudder. It's a purpose. And it comes from not your words and off the top of your head, but it comes from your being, which brings an integrable value to your word. Have you ever known somebody where, based on the chatter, you're not feeling like they're connected? Have you ever experienced that? With yourself? The mirror. After you reflect on your deepest values, access a pleasant memory. Observe the other person's nonverbal cues. Express appreciation. Speak warmly. Speak slowly. Speak briefly. Listen deeply. Now, I know that's a lot to memorize. And of course, when we learn, we need to learn these concepts. But once we learn, as experience it, then it becomes, through your neuronal pathway in your mind, a habit that then just happens. So what does it take to make that happen? Repetition. Practice, repetition. Practice, repetition. Yes, and the compassionate communication of the 12 points that I just laid out there is very similar, but adds another dimension, just like we talk about science of mind treatment here. Knowing your deepest values. Aligning with those values, as in your memories, positive thinking, knowing those values and aligning yourself to them. Expressing appreciation. There are many aspects of that that are very similar to our treatment. So as you know, there is continuous chatter in our head, and I wonder if all this constant chatter in our heads was there before radio and TV. The book, The Untethered Soul by Michael Senior, talks about that if you had a roommate, or maybe you have a roommate, that is always talking, constantly chattering, finding new subjects to constantly chatter about, that it can be very draining, and yet that's exactly the kind of roommate we have in our head. But, Reverend Kathy, I can't stop that mind chatter. It's not about stopping. It's about becoming aware. I'm too busy to meditate or do spiritual practice to stop the mind chatter. I'm too busy for God to get still, to listen. I'm too busy to hear any other voice of wisdom or to get any other answers for my worldly problems. Yes. Listening deeply takes discipline. Not just when you feel like it. Matter of fact, more so when you don't feel like it. More deeply when you don't feel like it. It takes intention, commitment, work, and time. Love thyself. Thyself with a capital T, that which is within you. Do you love yourself enough to listen deeply? The book Words Can Change Your Brain describes how the brain hears things in chunks. You can't repeat exactly what I say if I talk straight for 5 minutes of chatter. The average listener can only pay attention to a small amount of information for a brief period of time. The brain takes all these words and implied meanings and summarizes them into a momentary thought. And have you ever felt like words get in the way anyway? Ever felt like you had ideas, impressions, or feelings that were difficult to express in words? Words might seem like a wrapper around what's really going on inside. More words, more chatter get in the way of the message unless you slow down. I take the laughing as I recognize that. There are so many books that talk about for healing. We just need to be able to breathe through. Breathe through whatever's happening in the present moment. Hey, women who've had children. Was breathing ever an important part of birthing children? Are you comfortable in the silence? Are you comfortable in your own presence? Or are you looking for the next thing to distract you? It is a choice. And there are plenty of choices. In order to listen deeply to another, you must first be able to deeply listen to yourself. If I talk for a moment about deep listening with another, according to the 3 principles, which is something that was created by Sydney Banks called the 3 principles of mind, consciousness, and thought. Does that sound familiar? There are 4 types of listening, although when I looked it up on the internet, there are hundreds of types of listening. And I was thinking, wow, listening itself is a deep subject. But I loved these 4 descriptions of deep listening. Distracted listening. Some of you may not even be right here right now. Your body is here. And there's no judgment in that, because if you have something going on in your life, that's the distraction. That's the distraction. There is something deeper than what ails you. There is something deeper than what ails you. That connection is primary. Evaluative listening. Filtering what's being said. What do I already know about what you're saying? What's true? What's not true? Do I believe that? Am I building a case to improve, add, or subtract in order to agree or disagree with what's being said? Let me tell you, in academics, this is where I live. And I have a big event to put on in 2 weeks in Sacramento, and I was thinking about this going, yeah. And for myself, I know when that kind of listening is happening, that all I can be is pure love. Many of us are used to that kind of communication. It's second nature. I begin talking, and now all I'm going to do is evaluate what it is you're saying. What I know, and that's not true. Here's what I know. The headiness. How does that feel for deep listening? And then also in the academic environment is the pay attention listening. And we've all learned this because we go through school, and it's about trying to memorize, take notes, gather data, get words, skimming across the top. Not necessarily getting the deep meaning behind the picture we're trying to paint when we communicate with somebody. And then there is listening from your heart, from love. In this space, the mind is empty. The heart is open, and the mind is open. Not listening with an agenda. Being curious what the person's going to say next to help paint that picture. You don't get caught up in words, triggers, or opinions. You feel beyond or behind the words to get to where the other person is at, heart to heart. Boy, would I love politics to work that way. Amen. And I'm not a highly political person. And it'll never get that way unless it begins with each of us envisioning what that kind of deep listening, what it means, what it is, and experience it. It all begins in mind. We don't build the chairs, the room, the walls without first thinking and envisioning the possibilities. When listening with your heart, you hold on to connections more than you hold on to differences. Isn't that unity? Knowing the connections? Loving the beautiful YouTube of Imagine this morning in the meditation. Understanding the unity. And in the video, of course, human connection was listed. And that human connection is not just about the physical. It's the listening deeply, regardless of the labels. This book actually talks about when we suspend the mental chatter, the other forms of cognitive processing come into the foreground, including deeper intuitive capacities that use different neural processes than the chattering of our mind. Fascinating. The silence, the rest, in between. Spiritual practice. We have to train our mind to distance itself from the inner chatter that is continuously being generated. It's not to shut down the chatter. You won't be able to stop that. It's practicing the awareness of the chatter. That's your consciousness. In silence, in the distancing, in the space between, you can hear the voice of insight and intuition. So the goal is to master our deep awareness of ourselves. In doing that, We get less caught up in the drama, less caught up in the destructive emotional states that really sabotage our community, our ability to communicate with others and to connect with ourselves. Can we force anyone to listen to us deeply? There is something. The book talks about it. About drawing people in to listening. Did you notice the difference in your brain? When I chattered, did you notice? What's that? Can you identify that within you? The silence draws in the deeper listening. Do you think listening deeply is missing in today's world? So where does it begin? In me, and then with me. And that can be difficult because when everything else around you, everybody else around you, does not understand these principles, we get carried away with the chatter. I know some people are opposed to technology, and I've been reading stuff online on both directions. There's actually a Institute of Noetic Sciences conference happening in late July in Oakland. And I'm very compelled to a session on technology. Can it assist you in your spiritual practice and enlightenment? And of course, there'd be a lot of people who'd be like, eh. But I have to say to you that for myself, I can take my cell phone and turn on a certain app that I've been listening to for a while in my meditation. Zit! It's a grounding rod. And you'll need a grounding rod when you go out and talk with others. Those 12 steps of compassionate communication must be practiced, which again is a discipline. 21 days to make a habit. Science. I would love to be accused of deep listening. Wouldn't you? That means you have to be a leader. It means you have to be a leader of your own practice, of your own discipline, of your own deep listening. You don't need anybody else to practice that deep listening. Taking time to listen, as Connie said it, to the best teacher ever, the divinity within you, the wisdom that is already within you. There's a book that's called, I haven't read it, but in reading about it, a book called Time to Think by Nancy Klein. She says, silence is not nothingness. And deep listening is knowing inside everyone's mind is information of incredible value. Is that seeing the God in somebody else? And when you listen deeply, you might actually find some answers for you. Yes? But not if you already know all of that. All right, to end my lesson, I have a quick story. This is how God works for me in my life. I just love the affirmations and the confirmations. So my partner Sue is a teacher. Yay, she's out for summer. What does she do? She reads a lot. So she has 10 books stacked up on her side of the bed and 10 books stacked up around our living area. And let's see, my lesson titled Deep Listening has been on the docket for at least 4 weeks and probably more like 6. And of course, over that time, I just take notes in my journal about things that come together. Of course, the book inspired it, but pieces come together over time. So yesterday, I am intertwining and creating the quilt of all the things that I've put in my journal for today's lesson. And I look to my left, and there's a stack of books, and the top one says, The Way of Silence. Engaging the Sacred in Daily Life by Brother David Steindl Rast. And this is what the back flap reads as I ponder over. The Way of Silence shows how to practice deep listening in everyday life. How to turn away from noise and distraction, pay closer attention and embrace silence. Humbly, trusting in God, you'll discover how to quiet your mind in order to receive wisdom and insight. Listen deeply with a trusting heart and joyously discover a new interior freedom. Well, I couldn't have concluded any better than that. So go, listen deeply, my beloveds.